The Accidental Prime Minister, Chapter 9, Chairman of the Board. Next morning landed with a thud as Joe fell out of bed once again. He scratched his head. What was that noise? Joe opened the window on a group of workmen drilling and shouting instructions to each other, while a big yellow digger dug and shifted huge piles of dirt in the garden. Would you mind keeping it down? Joe asked. Sorry, lad, some clad's got us building a roller coaster in the garden. Oh, you carry on then, he said, closing the window. Joe yawned and gazed across the plush bedroom. I could get used to this, he thought. More chips, AJ shouted in his sleep, waking himself up. You had enough chips last night, Joe said, looking down at AJ on a camp bed next to Joe's huge four-poster. There was a knock at the door and Jenkins entered. Prime Minister, you must get dressed. The cabinet meeting is about to start. Of course, I need to save the park, said Joe. It's not just about the park, sir. It's about running the country. I guess, but what else should I do? Joe whispered. Pass some laws? That's usually how it goes, Jenkins said. Ugh, sighing with exasperation. Laws. Joe looked at AJ, smiling. Oh yeah, we'll pass some laws. And they both began to laugh hysterically. The cabinet room was packed. There were 30 or so men and women crammed in, all staring at Joe a little apprehensively. Good morning, ministers, Joe said, grinning. Good morning, Prime Minister, they all said back at him in that slow, robotic way kids do in an assembly. Joe was starting to get used to being called Prime Minister, even though it still made him giggle a bit inside. It's worth pointing out at this point what a minister actually is. It's a posh name for a person who works for the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is the person in charge of the ministers. Forgive me if you know all this, but it never hurts to explain things, does it? Say, for instance, you wanted to do something about schools. Say, for some reason, you wanted a day when the teachers get to be the pupils and the pupils get to be the teachers. I don't know, every month. Then you'd get the education minister to figure out all the details. That's code for getting the poor sap to do all the work. And if it's a success, the Prime Minister takes all the credit. And if it doesn't, well, just blame the minister in charge. That is, in essence, how the government works. Now, where were we? Oh, yes. First day of school. First day of cabinet. Can I just say on behalf of all of us, we are delighted to have you as our new leader, said a slimy-haired, pasty-faced man near the front. By pasty, I mean he had a pale face. He did not have a face like a hot, meaty snack. Not pasty. Thanks, and who are you? My name's George Unwin. I am First Lord Chancellor of the Exchequer. Say what now? Joe inquired. George Unwin looked more than a bit put out. He was a man not used to being unknown. There were a few sniggers from the other ministers. Is something funny? Joe asked innocently. Sorry, Prime Minister, sir. It was Darcy from Environment, said another minister, pointing to a lady with hair so big it looked as though it had been sculpted out of a hedgerow. You snitch, Peters. You were laughing too, she snarled. Hush now, or you'll all have to stay in when it's playtime, Joe joked. Jenkins whispered something in Joe's ear. What? I've just been informed that you don't get playtime. Well, I say we have morning play, afternoon play, and lunch play. Joe looked around the room. Can someone make that into a law, please? Already done it, came a far-off distant voice from down the corridor. Now, where were we? Oh, yes, Lord of the Checkers. What do you do? Exchequer, sir, George Unwin said, desperately trying not to shout before sighing and adding, It means I'm in charge of the money. AJ whispered something in Joe's ear. Roll around in it naked, you say? Joe asked AJ, just to be sure he hadn't misheard. AJ nodded. Okay, AJ and I would like to see if the money, if that's okay, we want to, just check it's all there. Well, I don't have it on me, the Chancellor said. Obviously, Joe said. I'm not an idiot, so where is it? In your office? Under your bed? Jo laughed. Well, no. It's... It's... You don't know, do you? Jo had stopped smiling now. Yes, of course I do. It's in the bank, probably, somewhere, Unwin said, his face slick with sweat. Look, if you don't know where all the cash is, just say you can be honest, Jo insisted. No, I'm sure I do know where it is. I think... Actually, I don't know where it all is, he said, scratching his head. Would it be okay if I just popped out to... go and check we haven't lost all the money? Jo nodded casually. Probably a good idea. Anyone else need to go and find anything? Check we haven't lost track of any battleships, misplaced a hospital or three, accidentally dropped a couple of prisons down the back of the sofa? Several ministers, desperate not to catch anyone's eye, tiptoed out after George Unwin. Right, said Jo, clapping his hands. Let's get started. My name is Jo. I am your Prime Minister. Super excited about that, obviously. First thing, let's get a few laws going, shall we? We have playtime for ministers now. All those in favour of expanding to everyone, raise your arm. Good, Jo said without even bothering to do a count. Also, I say we have a fancy dress day at least once a week. People in suits always look so sad. Let's have a fancy dress Friday, but on a Thursday. I think jelly should be free on the NHS, and let's make it illegal to have those comb-over haircuts, the ones where people have clearly gone bald, yet they insist on combing their hair right over the top of their shiny head. At this point, several members of the cabinet put their hand over their own heads, trying to hide their awful comb-overs. I think we should have one day a month where the teachers get to be the pupils and the pupils get to be the teachers. Let's start that tomorrow, Jo grinned. I'd like to fund research into finding out once and for all what happens to odd socks. It's, and I think I can speak for everyone, a problem that has blighted society for far too long. I suggest we replace the handshake with the more modern high five and have more dogs hanging out of car windows. If we could get that policy rolling out as soon as possible too, that would be great. And I'd also like to expand Britain's space programme to include sending a cow to Venus. If we don't do it, someone else will. And last but not least, I want to save the park by my house. Well, not just that one, but all the parks. Who's in charge of parks again? The door creaked open and Violetta walked in. Jo watched the atmosphere in the room suddenly shift, as if someone had turned a dial from lovely and happy to eek. That would be me, Violetta said, raising her eyebrow. Oh yeah, how could I forget? Well, Violetta, can I call you Violetta? No. Well, what do I call you? Jo asked. AJ whispered something unrepeatable in a children's book into Jo's ear. You can call me Crump, Violetta snarled. Very well, Crump. Now I know you and I have our differences, but what say we put those aside and see if we can, work together like friends? Jo gulped. Friends are for idiots. Parks are for kids. Why on earth would I want to save parks when they can be sold for cash? Well, parks are fun, AJ said. Who cares about fun? Violetta seethed. I do, said Jo. In fact, I think everyone should have as much fun as possible. I mean, why is it only kids that play in parks? Why don't we have special swings and slides for grown-ups too? Let's make it a new law. I'm talking bouncy castles for pensioners, climbing frames for firefighters, big twizzly slides for hotshot lawyers. We could have a big reopening of the park. Let's do it! Everyone in the room nodded and smiled enthusiastically, apart from Violetta. Now you want grown-ups having fun too? Oh, she sneered. I take it you're not in favour of my idea. Jo sighed. But you are forgetting that I am Prime Minister, so I can sort of save the park anyway. The room shifted uneasily. No one had ever stood up to Violetta Crump before. The whole room held its breath and waited for her to explode. But she didn't. She didn't say a word. She just smiled. Well, I say smile. Her mouth went pointy at the corners. It was as close to smiling as she could get. We'll see, she said as she left the cabinet room. That's settled then. When can we open the park? Jo asked. It's going to take a few days to arrange, Jenkins said. Let's have a big ceremony, invite the press, have someone special to do the honours. In fact, I know the perfect person to declare the park open. Joe grinned. Consider it done, Prime Minister, Jenkins said, looking at his watch, and then saying something quietly to Joe. Cabinet dismissed, Joe shouted, looking at Jenkins in amazement. Go enjoy your playtime, you've earned it. Joe turned to AJ. We're going to meet the Queen.